Avrupa Türk hazır giyim sektörünün en önemli ihracat pazarlarından bir tanesi ve Avrupa Birliği'nde bu sektöre dönük yeni düzenlemeler hayata geçirildi, yeni hedefler verildi. Üstelik bu hedefler de hareketli hedefler. Hedefi bulmak zordur ama hareketli hedefin arkasından gidip onu yakalamak çok daha zor. Bu hareketli hedeflere uyum sağlamak gerekiyor ve bu oturumda aslında bu nasıl gerçekleşecek bunu konuşacağız. Hareketli bir hedefe uyum, Avrupa Birliği'nin döngüsel tekstil gündemi bu oturumumuzun başlığı. Moderatörümüz Gençlik Platformu, TGS'de Gençlik Platformu üyesi ve TYH İnovasyon ve Sürdürülebilirlik Yöneticisi Sayın Ayşegül Kaya. Konuysa Ohana Public Affairs Kıdemli Danışmanı Karina Guruka. Kıymetli alkışlarınızla sahneye davet ediyorum. Buyurun efendim.
Hello, good morning. Welcome everyone here again. It's really good to be here at the wheel with the Bosphorus. Welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Just like our Mr. Barış said, my name is Ayşegül. I am member of Youth Platform of TGST. And also I am the Innovation and Sustainability Manager at the TYH Textile. Today we are having Ms. Karina here from Ohana. Today's session is going to be about upcoming legislations, of course. This is the only topic or agenda nowadays for us. Welcome. I have a couple of questions for you. I know you have a very good presentation for us. I hope it's going to be informative for all our participants here. Could you introduce yourself first? And then we knew that EU Commission has been changed. So what's happening there? What is new for us? We are well aware of Green Deal last couple of years, but is it enough for us? And of course, we are really curious about your suggestions due to your expertise area. And then we can see what we can do.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, Ayşegül. So I work on circular economy policies. I specialize in everything that has to do with the design and waste of the product. And indeed, as you have mentioned, last June we had elections in Brussels. So we are expecting now the new commissioners to take their places and some changes in the EU. So we are talking a lot about the competitiveness of Europe, and textile industry has moved from this non-regulated to almost over-regulated industry in the EU. So I feel that the next mandate will be a lot about thinking how we can make this industry transform, become more sustainable, but at the same time still remain competitive for producers from all over the world.
Perfect.
And yeah, I will say more about that during my presentation.
Of course. Stage is yours. Please.
Perfect.
Welcome.
Thank you. Okay. So just before we start, I wanted to have a little quiz. So I thought it's going to be interesting to see for how many of you my presentation is relevant today. So don't be shy. Please raise your hands if you sell your products in the EU. Okay. Great news. So it doesn't really matter what kind of products you sell, whether these are the intermediate products or the final products such as apparel and footwear. Your company will have to be affected by the EU product legislation. You will fall either indirectly with the intermediate product because your customer has to comply, or because you're simply selling directly to a brand. And about the EU product legislation, I'm going to talk in a second. But firstly, I just wanted to introduce Ohana, so the company where I work. So we are a boutique public affairs consultancy. We are specialized in sustainability regulation. Our big footprint is in textile and apparel industries. We are based in Brussels, which might be interesting for you because we get to hear all the gossips, talks, everything that happens in terms of legislation that hasn't been published yet. And lastly, we work with big brands such as H&M Group, Hugo Boss, VF Corporation, but also smaller brands, textile-to-textile recyclers. We also have clients outside of the textile industry. And with that, we have some agenda for today. So first, EU political context. Then I'm going to deep dive into some legislation that will have an effect on you or your customers. And lastly, I'm going to share some recommendations, so something to keep in mind. And the overall objective of my presentation is to really give you an understanding of this change of textile industry, so how it moved from non-regulated to almost over-regulated, and help you understand what is this EU circular agenda, and hopefully help you also prepare for what's coming in the future. So with that, deep diving into political context, I'm going to start with the EU Green Deal. Probably some of you have heard this term. This is basically a strategy that made the change in the EU. That was like a vision that really kind of decided that we are going to move to become climate neutral by 2050. And keeping that in mind, the EU really wants us to change the way we think about design, production, consumption, but also disposal of products. It is also about moving away from virgin materials and trying to focus more on secondary materials to ensure that we can actually be climate neutral. So of course, this is a lot about scaling circularity across supply chains. And so with that in mind, the EU has gone further and decided to work on Circular Economy Action Plan. And that is a plan that encompasses textile industry, that says that the products that are sold in the EU should be sustainable, so circular. Going a step further, we have the EU Textile Strategy, which is basically a detailed vision on how these products should be sustainable. So they should be ideally durable, recyclable, potentially made with recycled content. So really, how do we get there? And this is not something I'm going to mention in my presentation today, but this strategy is not only about the sustainability from the design aspect, but also about the human rights and making products sustainable from this human aspect. And so these three pillars are part of the old mandate, so something that was proposed around 5 years ago. And so, as we just said here, we just had EU elections in June. That means that we are entering a new EU mandate. And so, if you see the dates, the EU mandate will finish in 2029. If you know that the textile strategy has to come into place by 2030, then you can quickly understand that a lot will happen this year, well, these years. A lot will be about the implementation of the legislation that has been proposed as the part of the Circular Economy Action Plan and EU Textile Strategy. What is also important to keep in mind is a lot of pieces of legislation have been proposed, but we are still lacking some details and guidance on how do we actually implement that in practice. And we call that in our EU jargon secondary legislation. And so we are expecting that. We are expecting that the policymakers will clarify some laws that they have proposed under the previous mandate in the next years. Maybe also something to keep in mind that could be interesting for you is, of course, a lot has been proposed, a lot has been done, but this goal to become a sustainable industry by 2030 is quite strong. So it might be that in the next mandate, we will still have to face some new laws, new legislation that could make it even more burdensome. So yeah, keep that in mind. And now I'm going to deep dive into the actual pieces of legislation, starting with something very key, so Eco-Design Sustainable Products Regulation, briefly called ESPR. So here you have a little graph. Not a secret that, of course, circularity really starts with the design of the product. So when we think about implementing circular economy, we have to think about this key phase. So this year, the European legislators have adopted the Eco-Design Sustainable Products Regulation, and they made it very clear that ESPR should be a market access legislation. That means that no matter what is the size of your company, no matter how much you sell, if you sell to the EU, you will have to comply as of 2028 with these Eco-Design Sustainable Products Regulation. What is a bit tricky is they have proposed this general piece of legislation, but they forgot yet to work on the eco-design measurements. So that will come as a part of this secondary legislation. We are expecting to know that only in 2027. That means that you know that you will have to make products sustainable as of 2028, but you don't know yet what measures do you have to comply with. But as I told you, we are based in Brussels, so we do hear a lot of gossips, talks, and everything that has been already kind of on the agenda of the policymakers. So one of the, or maybe some of the requirements that I'm going to share in the next slides are almost guaranteed. We are 99.9% sure that these will be the eco-design requirements that will come in the future. We don't know, of course, the exact thresholds and how they're going to work in practice, but they will come. What is also important to keep in mind is these eco-design requirements will put some burden also on producers to share the information about your products. You will have to comply with performance requirements and information requirements. Performance requirements is really that you claim that your product is durable, that your product is recyclable, that you say, what is your product? What is the performance? The information requirement is really that you're going to prove that either to your consumer or maybe to a recycler. What kind of information does it have? So it sounds a bit cryptic, but I'm going to give you now examples. What does this actually mean? So I'm going to start with the first one, durability. So the performance requirement is that your product is simply durable. What that means from the information requirement perspective is that your consumer needs to know how many washes can a t-shirt that you sold to him actually withstand, to make it durable. So let's say I go to a store, I see a t-shirt, I see a tag or a label, or I scan a digital product passport of this product, and I see, okay, I can wash 30 times this t-shirt, and nothing should happen to it. That means that this is actually a durable product. And of course, this comes with some impact on you or potentially your customers. So you will have to ensure that the fabrics comply with certain international standards, certain standards that prove that the fabrics are durable. And you would have to test your fabrics, make sure that you can make a certain amount of washes, not only fabrics as such, but also the final products. And most likely this cost and all these documentation and all this burden would be to be paid by you, not really by the brand. So this is something to keep in mind. Next, I'm going to move to recycled content. So from the performance requirement perspective, you will just have to communicate that you comply with the minimum recycled content per apparel product. It's important to know that until now, it is most likely per apparel product. We don't know whether that's going to be the final piece of legislation, but today, as we hear, it should be per product. And we also don't know, unfortunately, yet what would be the threshold. As mentioned, that's to come in 2027. And from the information perspective, the customer will have to know how much recycled content is actually in that tag. So it's for them to be aware. And what that means for you is, most importantly, you will have to know your data. You will need to know where your recycled content comes from, so whether it's post-industrial, pre-consumer, or post-consumer. I put in bold here post-consumer waste because we hear that this would be the favorite option by the policymakers. They really want to emphasize the circular economy, so really closing the loop coming from waste to a product. Of course, again, you will have to keep in mind some extra costs that could come with that. You also need to make sure that you can verify the data that the recycler is giving you, because you will have to pass that further down the supply chain. Next is recyclability. So again, you just have to prove that your product is recyclable. What that means most likely is that you're using monomaterials, you have less complicated blends, or simply just less blends in general. The information requirement is a bit different in that aspect, because of course it's important for the consumer to know that the product is recyclable, but most importantly, it has to be known to the recycler. So the recycler needs to know that this product can be easily recycled, ideally either by knowing that the trims are easily removable, or that there are no harmful substances that could hamper recycling, or simply that there are no any further hard zip, etc. buttons that could be difficult to remove. And what that means for you is just simply you need to think of fabrics that have less blends, think of the solutions for recycler to make it quite easy for them to recycle the product. Now I'm going to move to the Waste Framework Directive, so another piece of legislation that is quite key for the EU circular agenda. And with the difference to the Eco-Design Sustainable Products Regulation, this one is about the aspect of end of life of the product. So it's about collection, it's about sorting, it's about recycling. So it's really kind of closing this loop, as I mentioned, thinking about the product as okay, it's produced, it's designed, it's collected, and then how do we input that back to a new product? So really closing the loop. Also, a big difference between Waste Framework Directive and the Eco-Design Sustainable Products Regulation is that this file hasn't been finalized yet. So the EU legislative process is still ongoing. We expect the final text sometime in Q1, so the first quarter of next year. If we are lucky, maybe last quarter of this year, but that's very optimistic. And so, Still to be clarified, so all I'm sharing, it's still in the discussions. But something that for sure will not change, no matter what's the legislative discussions, is that Waste Framework Directive introduces mandatory extended producer responsibility for textiles. What that means is a producer will have to bear a responsibility for the product that they put on the market. We are following this logic of polluter pays principle, meaning you put on the market, you become a polluter. You need to pay for it. And the EU policymakers have thought of EPR, so the extended producer responsibility, as one of the key building blocks to transition from linear to circular economy. As mentioned, the whole thing is just really to ensure that we can close the loop between the design and the end of waste, and again, to design. This is a very complex graph to show what are actually EPR fees. So what is this extended producer responsibility in practice? I took an example of H&M brand. So what this means, let's say H&M buys a product, it's a dress, it gives it branding, H&M logo. Then H&M has to add the cost of the disposal of this product. So what is actually sold to the consumer is a dress, plus this additional cost of the disposal of that dress. What that means in practice is that the price has to be higher. A question to be asked is, who will bear the product, the price of this more expensive product, whether that's a producer or a customer. That's something that is still a little bit unclear who will pay for that. So in case it's a producer, so in that case, H&M brand, what we can expect is that this could have an impact on the whole supply chain. Because if the producer has to pay more for a product, then of course it could be that they might want to ask you for certain discounts, or maybe they would rethink what kind of products they purchase. So of course, keep in mind that potentially your customers will have to pay higher fees for making the products available on the EU market, and that should come sometime in 2027. What I also wanted to talk about is the possibility of getting an eco-modulation, so in less complex terms, a discount. In case H&M decides to sell a t-shirt, it's just a regular t-shirt, 100% cotton, the producer has to pay a full fee, so 100%. In case the t-shirt is recyclable, has recycled content, is durable, so incorporates any of the eco-design measures that I just mentioned, the producer can ask for a discount. What that means in practice is we will have some minimum requirements that will be defined by Eco-Design Sustainable Products Regulation. Just to make it clear, we don't know whether that's 5%. I'm imagining here. And that will be a market access. So you have to produce a t-shirt that has 5% recycled content. With that, your customer, so the producer will have to pay €2. If you're able to offer a product that goes beyond this 5%, so has 6% recycled content, then your producer, so your customer, can ask for a discount. And of course, the more recycled content you have, the more you can ask for a discount on the EU level, meaning the more sustainable is your product, the less you pollute, so the less you pay. What I also wanted to talk about just very quickly is, of course, the EU legislators have been thinking about discounts, but they have been also thinking about punishments. We're talking a lot about ultra-fast fashion, so brands like Shein or Temu, that are producing, very big amounts of garments, and they have a lot of products per collection, etc. So the policymakers are currently talking about what can be done to actually disincentivize the companies to have a lot of collections and a lot of references under the collection. And this is important to keep in mind because that might come with fewer orders from your customers. Should this be part of the final EU legislation under the Waste Framework Directive, this could be quite harmful also, not only for your customer, but also for you. Okay, now I'm going to move to recommendations. Firstly, starting with a timeline, so trying to help you understand how much time you have to prepare for everything. So I've mentioned that the eco-design requirements are not done, they're not defined yet. They should come at the end of 2026. That's the official version. Our version is beginning of 2027. That basically means that while this is happening, you should already start thinking how to prepare for certification, tests, how to comply with ISO standards, what kind of new fibers can you propose, etc. Later, the Waste Framework Directive comes into force sometime in the summer of 2027, and that means that the brands could face higher costs per product that they make available on the EU market. And lastly, very key date, 2028. So that is the moment that the products that will enter the EU market have to comply with these minimum eco-design requirements. So what you also have to think about is if you are producing products that are not compliant with these eco-design requirements, you should make sure that you sell them prior to 2028, because afterwards they can just simply not enter the market anymore. And so, to sum up, my recommendation for you is to start investing in the eco-design of your products or fabrics. So really think about recyclability, durability, recycled content, and maybe, fewer substances of concern that could have an impact on recycling. But also, things like carbon, so how basically heavy is your product for the environment. That also comes with thinking of your competitive advantage. I think it's quite logic that you cannot be at the same time durable and recyclable. So you have to pick one. Either you're durable or you're recyclable, or maybe you know someone who is a textile-to-textile recycler and you can specialize in extremely high amount of recycled content. Don't forget to think about going beyond these minimum requirements, just because it will be of interest to the brands. As I shown you in the graph, the higher are these sustainable criteria, the more beneficial it is for a producer. Also, don't forget about traceability. Make sure you can certify everything. By everything, I mean, for example, where does your recycled content come from? Who certified that? Keep this documentation. Make sure you really know your product. Lastly, don't forget that in case this trend of tackling fast fashion goes through, that could have an impact on you and a potential decrease in orders. Thank you. I hope this was useful, and
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, thank you for your presentation and the information that you give us today. As a garment manufacturer, as an apparel industry who export lots of businesses to the EU, it's important for us to consider your suggestion here today, because the upcoming legislations are going to be defined in the near future. So as the theme of this conference is redefine, realign, and refashion, it's important for us to consider our business model and make some changes today. Thank you for your attention, and have a good conference.